The removal of the fence marked a new chapter for Harmony Oaks, but it wasn't an instant return to normalcy. The damage done by weeks of tension and division couldn't be erased overnight. Yet, as the barrier came down, something remarkable began to happen. People started talking again. Neighbors who had avoided each other during the height of the conflict now found themselves exchanging cautious smiles or offering small apologies. "I'm sorry we didn't stand up for you sooner," one woman told John at the local grocery store. He nodded graciously, accepting her words without holding on to bitterness. John wasted no time reclaiming his land. With the fence gone, he reopened old cattle trails and restored access points that had been blocked. He even repaired the gravel road leading out of his property, smoothing it over so it was easier for cars to pass. Some residents initially worried he might retaliate by keeping the gate closed permanently, but John surprised everyone by leaving it wide open. "That gate caused enough trouble already," he said with a chuckle when asked about it. "Let's leave it open and move on." The HOA worked hard to rebuild trust within the community. True to their word, they formed a committee dedicated to fostering better communication between longtime landowners like John and newer residents. Monthly meetings were held where everyone could voice concerns, share ideas, and collaborate on projects. Slowly but surely, these gatherings helped bridge the gap between two worlds, those who valued tradition and those who sought modernity. It wasn't always perfect. Disagreements still arose, but they were handled with patience and respect rather than hostility. One of the most significant changes came in how people viewed John's ranch. Before the fence incident, many saw it as an outdated relic, a blotch on the otherwise polished suburb. But now, they began to appreciate its charm and history. Kids from the subdivision started visiting on weekends, fascinated by the cows, horses, and tractors that seemed straight out of a storybook. Parents joined in too, organizing picnics near the barn or helping John mend fences. What was once seen as an obstacle became a source of pride, a reminder of the area's roots and resilience. As months passed, life in Harmony Oaks settled into a rhythm that felt more authentic than before. The HOA loosened some of its rigid rules, allowing for more individuality in home designs and landscaping. Residents decorated their yards with wildflowers instead of manicured hedges, and weathered wooden fences replaced sleek metal ones. Even Laura Bennett softened her approach, often stopping by John's ranch to chat and thank him for pushing them to rethink their priorities. "You taught us a valuable lesson," she admitted one evening as they watched the sunset together. Sometimes progress means preserving what matters most. For John, the victory went beyond just getting rid of the fence. It was about proving that standing up for your beliefs could inspire change, not just for yourself, but for others too. He continued living his life, much as he always had, tending to his cattle, fixing broken equipment, and enjoying quiet moments under the wide-open sky. Yet there was a newfound sense of peace in knowing that his neighbors finally understood why the ranch meant so much to him. Years later, when newcomers asked about the gate that once stood at the edge of John's property, older residents would smile knowingly. "That gate," they'd say, "it taught us all a lesson about respect and compromise." And every time someone drove past the ranch, they couldn't help but feel grateful for the rolling fields, the grazing cattle, and the man who refused to let anyone take it away. In the end, Harmony Oaks truly lived up to its name, not through strict rules or uniformity, but through unity forged from struggle. John Callahan remained a symbol of strength and integrity, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can lead to the biggest changes. The day the fence went up around John's ranch, everything changed. It started early in the morning when the sound of heavy machinery rumbled through the quiet countryside. At first, John thought it was just another construction crew working on a new house nearby. But as he stepped outside to investigate, his heart sank. A team of workers was busy erecting tall iron posts along the edge of his property, stringing barbed wire between them. The sight made his stomach churn. This wasn't just any fence. It was a barrier designed to cut him off from the world he'd always known. John stormed over to the site, demanding answers. "What's going on here? Who gave you permission to do this?" he shouted, his voice trembling with anger. One of the workers shrugged and pointed to a clipboard tucked under his arm. "Orders from the HOA," he said casually, as if fencing off someone's entire property was an everyday occurrence. John grabbed the clipboard and scanned the documents attached to it. Sure enough, there was a notice from the Harmony Oaks Association authorizing the project. But what caught his eye and filled him with rage was the lack of his signature anywhere on the paperwork. They hadn't even bothered to ask for his consent. By noon, the fence was complete. It stretched across every boundary of his land, towering high enough to block most of the view from the subdivision. There was only one gate, a small manual entry point located near the main road that led out of the ranch. Everything else was sealed off: his access roads, his cattle trails, even the shortcut he used to reach town. As John stood there staring at the cold metal bars, he realized the full weight of what had happened. The HOA hadn't just fenced in his property, they had fenced him in. At first, John felt paralyzed by frustration. How could they treat him like this? His family had lived on this land for generations, long before the HOA or their fancy rules existed. And yet, here they were, acting as though they owned the place. But as the initial shock wore off, something else began to stir inside him, a spark of defiance. If the HOA wanted control, he decided, then they'd have to deal with the consequences of their actions. That single gate became the key to his plan. Without it, no one could leave or enter the ranch, not even the residents of Harmony Oaks who relied on the road cutting through his property to get to work, school, or shopping centers. For the rest of the day, John watched as cars lined up at the gate, honking their horns and shouting impatiently. Drivers rolled down their windows, expecting him to open the gate automatically. But John crossed his arms and stood firm. "You'll have to ask nicely," he said with a wry smile. Some people groaned in frustration, while others pleaded with him to let them through. Eventually, after hours of waiting, John relented, but not without making sure they understood the situation. "This is your HOA's doing," he told each driver. "If you don't like it, take it up with them." Word of the gate spread quickly throughout the subdivision. By evening, social media buzzed with complaints about the stubborn rancher holding everyone hostage. Parents fretted about being late to drop off their kids at school, professionals worried about missing important meetings, and delivery drivers cursed the detours that added miles to their routes. Meanwhile, John sat on his porch, sipping coffee and watching the chaos unfold. He knew the HOA would come knocking soon, but for now, he savored the irony. They had tried to box him in, but instead, they'd handed him the power to dictate their daily lives, one gate at a time. As night fell and the traffic died down, John couldn't help but chuckle. The HOA had underestimated him, and he intended to make sure they regretted it. The arrival of the Harmony Oaks subdivision marked a turning point for John and his beloved ranch. At first, the newcomers seemed harmless enough, families moving in with dreams of suburban bliss, retirees seeking quiet corners to enjoy their golden years, and young professionals eager to escape the chaos of city life. For a brief moment, John allowed himself to believe that these new neighbors might appreciate the charm of his ranch. After all, it stood as a reminder of simpler times, a stark contrast to the cookie-cutter houses sprouting up around him. But it didn't take long for reality to sink in. The HOA, or Harmony Oaks Association, quickly established itself as the governing body of the neighborhood. Their mission was clear: maintain uniformity, enforce strict rules, and ensure that every inch of the subdivision looked picture-perfect. To them, perfection meant neat lawns, freshly painted fences, and streets free of mud or dust. Unfortunately for John, his ranch, with its weathered barns, gravel roads, and wandering livestock, didn't align with their vision. At first, the complaints were subtle. A few residents grumbled about the occasional cow straying too close to their property, or the dust kicked up by John's tractor. Others expressed concern over the eyesore of rusted equipment sitting idle near the edge of his land. These murmurs reached the ears of the HOA board, who saw an opportunity to assert their authority. They began holding meetings behind closed doors, discussing ways to address the issue. Some members suggested offering John money to sell his land, while others proposed stricter regulations to force compliance. But none of them bothered to speak directly to John or consider how deeply connected he was to the ranch. As the months passed, tensions escalated. The HOA started sending letters to John, politely at first but growing increasingly demanding. They requested that he repaint his barn, pave his driveway, and keep his animals confined to specific areas. Each letter came with thinly veiled threats of fines or legal action if he failed to comply. John read these notices with a mix of frustration and disbelief. How could they expect him to change a way of life that had existed long before they arrived? He tried reasoning with them, explaining the history and significance of the ranch, but his words fell on deaf ears. What made matters worse was the attitude of some residents. While a handful remained friendly and even supportive of John, many others sided with the HOA. They saw the ranch not as a piece of living history, but as an inconvenience, a disruption to the polished image they wanted to project. Gossip spread like wildfire at community events, painting John as stubborn and uncooperative. Some neighbors avoided him altogether, fearing association with someone who dared defy the HOA. Despite the mounting pressure, John refused to back down. He knew the value of his land wasn't measured in dollars or aesthetics. It was measured in memories, sweat, and sacrifice. Yet even he couldn't have predicted what happened next. One day, surveyors appeared at the edge of his property, marking boundaries with stakes and bright orange ribbons. When John asked what they were doing, they simply replied, "Orders from the HOA." It became painfully clear that the association had no intention of backing off. They were determined to impose their will, no matter the cost. Unbeknownst to John, this was only the beginning. The HOA's plans went far beyond repainting barns or paving driveways. What they had in mind would leave John and the entire community reeling. As dusk settled over the ranch, casting long shadows across the fields, John felt a chill run down his spine. Something big was coming, and he wasn't sure he was ready for it. As the standoff dragged on, the cracks within the HOA grew wider and deeper. Board meetings, once orderly and efficient, turned into shouting matches. Members accused each other of poor decision-making, stubbornness, and outright incompetence. Laura Bennett, who had always been confident in her leadership, found herself struggling to maintain control. Her usual sharp tone was met with resistance from members who were tired of the chaos. "We're losing credibility," one member snapped during a particularly heated session. "A whole town is talking about us like we're villains." It wasn't just internal conflict that plagued the HOA. Their legal bills began piling up as well. Residents demanded answers and refunds, after hiring lawyers to explore their options for bypassing the gate or suing the HOA for mismanagement. Meanwhile, John's attorney sent formal letters outlining his grievances, warning of potential lawsuits if the fence wasn't removed immediately. The HOA's finances, which had seemed so secure at first, started to dwindle under the weight of mounting costs. It became painfully clear that this battle was costing them far more than money. It was costing them their reputation. Public sentiment continued to shift against the HOA. Local news outlets covered every twist and turn of the story, painting the association as overbearing and out of touch. Interviews with residents revealed a growing divide within Harmony Oaks. Some still supported the HOA, believing John was being unreasonable, but many others expressed sympathy for him. "He's lived here longer than any of us," one neighbor said during a televised town hall meeting. "How would you feel if someone built a fence around your home without asking?" The turning point came when a group of residents organized a petition demanding the removal of the fence. Hundreds signed it, including some who had initially sided with the HOA. They delivered it to the board during a packed community meeting, where emotions ran high. One elderly woman stood up and addressed the room, her voice trembling with emotion. "I moved here because I wanted peace and beauty, not division and anger. This isn't what Harmony Oaks is supposed to be." Her words struck a chord, earning applause from the crowd. Faced with mounting pressure, the HOA held another emergency meeting. This time, however, there was no yelling, only quiet resignation. Laura reluctantly admitted that they had made a mistake. "Maybe we acted too quickly," she said softly, avoiding eye contact with the others. For the first time since the dispute began, the board agreed unanimously to take down the fence and issue a public apology to John. When they approached him with their proposal, John listened carefully. He could see the weariness in their eyes and hear the sincerity in their voices. Still, he didn't accept their offer right away. "You've caused a lot of damage," he told them. "Not just to me, but to this whole community. If you really want to fix things, you need to make sure this never happens again." The HOA agreed to establish a new committee tasked with fostering better communication between longtime landowners and newer residents. They also promised to involve John in future development plans, ensuring his voice would be heard. Finally, after weeks of tension and uncertainty, John nodded. "All right," he said simply. "Let's get that fence down." The day the fence came down felt like a fresh start for everyone. As workers dismantled the iron posts and rolled up the barbed wire, neighbors gathered to watch. Some cheered, while others quietly reflected on how close they'd come to tearing their community apart. Though scars remained, there was hope that Harmony Oaks could finally live up to its name. For John, standing on his porch and watching the last piece of the fence disappear, it was a moment of vindication. He hadn't asked for a fight, but when it came, he stood his ground. And in doing so, he reminded everyone of something important. Progress doesn't have to come at the expense of respect, history, or humanity. The next morning, John woke up to the sound of car engines revving and tires screeching outside his gate. It was 6:30 a.m., and already a line of vehicles stretched down the road, their drivers growing increasingly impatient. Some leaned on their horns, creating a cacophony of noise that echoed across the ranch. Others stepped out of their cars, pacing back and forth while muttering under their breath. The scene was chaos, and John was at the center of it all. Standing on his porch with a cup of steaming coffee in hand, John watched the commotion unfold. He wasn't surprised by the reaction. He had expected this much when he decided to make the HOA feel the impact of their own decisions. Still, seeing the frustration firsthand was oddly satisfying. These were the same people who had turned a blind eye to his complaints about the fence, the same ones who had dismissed him as stubborn or unreasonable. Now, they were learning what it felt like to be inconvenienced, except this time, there was no one else to blame but themselves. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, tempers flared. A mother trying to get her kids to school rolled down her window and yelled, "Open the gate already. We're going to be late." John simply smiled and replied, "You'll have to wait your turn." Another man, dressed in a suit and tie, stormed over to the gate, visibly fuming. "Do you know how much money I'm losing because of this?" he demanded. John nodded calmly and said, "I imagine it's a lot less than what my family has lost since the HOA showed up." Despite the mounting tension, John refused to budge. He opened the gate only when he felt like it, letting one car through at a time. Each driver had to stop and ask politely, a small act of respect that many found humiliating. For years, John had been treated as an outsider in his own home, someone whose needs didn't matter. Now he was making sure everyone understood exactly how it felt to be ignored. By mid-morning, the situation had escalated further. Delivery trucks attempting to reach homes within the subdivision were forced to take long detours, leaving packages behind schedule. Construction crews working on new houses inside Harmony Oaks arrived hours late, delaying projects and costing thousands of dollars. Even emergency services were affected. A fire truck responding to a minor kitchen fire barely made it in time due to the blocked route. Word spread quickly among residents, and soon the entire community was buzzing with outrage. But not everyone directed their anger at John. Some began questioning why the HOA hadn't consulted him before building the fence. "This is ridiculous," muttered a woman waiting in line. "They can't just lock someone out of their own property and expect everything to run smoothly." Her neighbor nodded in agreement. "If anything, we should be mad at the HOA for causing this mess, not at John." Social media exploded with posts about the standoff. Photos of the long lines of cars circulated online, accompanied by heated debates, while some commenters sided with the HOA, accusing John of being difficult. Others rallied behind him. One viral post read, "John Callahan isn't the problem here. The HOA fenced off his land without asking. Maybe it's time we start listening to him instead of blaming him." Dozens of likes and shares followed, sparking conversations beyond the confines of Harmony Oaks. Meanwhile, John continued his quiet protest. He knew the inconvenience wouldn't last forever. It was only a matter of time before the HOA came knocking, but every moment counted. With each passing day, more people began to see the bigger picture. The gate wasn't just a physical barrier. It symbolized the divide between progress and tradition, between uniformity and individuality. And John, standing firm with his weathered boots and determined gaze, represented something many had forgotten: the value of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. As the afternoon sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the ranch, John leaned against the gatepost and let out a deep sigh. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more arguments, and more pressure. But for now, he allowed himself a small smile. The HOA had underestimated him once. They wouldn't do it again. It didn't take long for the HOA to realize that their plan had backfired spectacularly. By the third day of John's gate standoff, complaints from residents were flooding into their office. Emails piled up in inboxes, phone calls jammed the lines, and angry neighbors showed up unannounced at board meetings. The message was clear. Something had to be done, and fast. The HOA called an emergency meeting to address the growing crisis. Board members gathered around a large conference table, their faces tense with frustration. Some argued that they needed to negotiate with John immediately, while others insisted on taking legal action to force him to open the gate permanently. Voices rose as tempers flared. "We can't let one man hold this entire community hostage," snapped Laura Bennett, the head of the board. Her sharp tone cut through the room, but it did little to resolve the divide among the members. Amidst the chaos, a few voices of reason emerged. Tom Carter, one of the newer board members, suggested trying to understand John's perspective. "He's lived here longer than any of us," Tom said cautiously. "Maybe we should have talked to him before putting up that fence. This is his home, not just a piece of property." His words were met with groans and eye rolls from some of the older members, who dismissed his suggestion as naive. But a handful of others nodded in agreement, quietly acknowledging that the HOA might have gone too far. Determined to find a solution, the board decided to send a delegation to speak with John directly. They arrived at his ranch late in the afternoon, finding him leaning against the gatepost with a cup of coffee in hand. He looked relaxed, almost amused, as the group approached. "Well, well," he said with a sly grin. "Took you long enough." Laura stepped forward, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Mr. Callahan, this has gone on long enough. You're causing significant disruption to our community, and we need you to cooperate." John raised an eyebrow, unfazed by her stern tone. "Cooperate," he replied calmly. Funny choice of words coming from someone who built a fence around my land without even asking me. The conversation quickly grew heated. Laura accused John of being unreasonable, while another board member pleaded with him to consider the impact on innocent families. John listened patiently but remained firm. "You want cooperation," he said finally. "Then start by taking down that fence. Apologize for treating me like I don't belong here. Until then, don't expect me to make things easy for you." Frustrated and empty-handed, the delegation returned to the HOA office. Their failure only deepened the rift within the board. Tempers continued to flare, leading to shouting matches during subsequent meetings. 2 members resigned outright, fed up with the infighting and lack of progress. Meanwhile, public opinion in Harmony Oaks began to shift. Residents started organizing petitions and attending town hall meetings to voice their concerns, not just about the gate, but about the HOA's handling of the situation. Local media picked up the story, turning it into a symbol of the broader conflict between suburban development and rural traditions. Reporters interviewed John, capturing his calm demeanor and unwavering stance. "This isn't about revenge," he told them. "It's about respect. My family has been here for generations, and we deserve to be treated fairly." His words resonated with many, including some longtime HOA supporters who began questioning whether preserving uniformity was worth alienating a man whose roots ran deeper than anyone else's in the area. As the days turned into weeks, cracks began to form not only in the HOA's authority, but also in the unity of the subdivision itself. Neighbors argued over whose side to take, friendships strained under opposing views, and trust eroded. What had once been marketed as a harmonious community now felt fractured and divided. And at the heart of it all stood John, steadfast and resolute, reminding everyone of the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it comes at a cost. By the time the HOA reconvened to discuss next steps, it was clear that their usual tactics weren't going to work. They had underestimated John Callahan, and now they were paying the price. But more importantly, they were beginning to see that this fight wasn't just about a gate or a fence. It was about values, fairness, and the true meaning of community.